it's really got to be startling almost when you uncover something like that, and it all lines up, so perfectly to something that's written so long ago.
That's right.
I mean, it's got to be like, that ties right in like that. One little piece of evidence. I mean, that to me, it's fascinating. I mean,
It is.
Because you'd say, what's the likelihood of this? How accurate can it really be? It was that long ago. It's passed through generations, etc. But you can find one little piece of evidence that says, well, if we find it at this level, we time it this way, and it syncs up with what's written. That's a pretty good chain of evidence.
It is. So it really is. It's chains of evidence that you're building and that have been built up in the last 200 years of the discipline. And it's not just based on one site. It's based on hundreds of sites that have been excavated and how they interconnect and how they interweave and how these the different levels connect to one another as well. So we're building on the shoulders of previous generations that have worked in the country of Israel and other parts of the Middle East to understand these interconnections, and it's fascinating and exciting.
Now tell me, this is really interesting to me. You say that they just build a city on top of a city on top of a city. How does that happen over time?
Well, they found a place that would have excellent a water source, a good defensible position, be perhaps close to a crossroads area, very important for trade routes and that kind of thing. And of course, agricultural land. Those four things were very important. And again, we're talking about thousands of years. So rather than moving the site, and they did sometimes move cities as well, but rather than move the site, if the site was destroyed in an earthquake or destroyed by an invading army or something else happened, rather than moving someplace else, they already had those elements all there. They simply brought in fill dirt sometimes, they leveled everything out, and they built right on top. Sometimes they reused the material from previous, the stones. Why quarry new stones when you've got them? So looking at the evidence is very complex because you have to look at the material and realize that some of it could have been reused and some of it could have been it's not all that cut and dry when you're going through these things in the archaeological record.
Yeah, so that's where I guess the expertise comes in as you're going through this to try to sort.
And you're working with a group of experts. We're working with it's a multidisciplinary field where you have to work with a lot of different people. You can't specialize in everything. So we've got somebody that analyzes the faunal analysis of the bones. We've got pottery experts. We've got epigraphers that deal with the language material. If we find inscriptions and that kind of thing, we deal with geologists and surveyors and architects and art historians and artists who draw everything and photographers. And of course, nowadays in cyber archaeology, everything is high tech as well. So we're taking aerial shots with drones, and we're coordinating this in very sophisticated ways to try to get a full record of what we're excavating, because it's a destructive discipline, and as you go through these layers, you're actually destroying evidence as you go through. So you have to document everything.
Wow. Yeah, I guess that's true. As you're saying, you're kind of, as you're going through it, you're disturbing, or in your term, you're destroying it. So you got to be very careful. You're not destroying something that you can never reclaim.
That's right.
Yeah, I'd
That's
imagine.
right.
Now, one of the things that was, I thought, very stimulating, you brought me to one display case, and you said, here's these silver coins. You said these would have been similar to the coins that Judas would have received.
Right.
Talk about that.
Right. We have some coins here in the museum that are from Tyre, the city of Tyre, which is on the Phoenician coast in what is today Lebanon. And these were chosen in the New Testament era as the temple tax coin. So when Jesus threw out the money changers in Jerusalem, what was he doing? Well, people were coming to the temple. They were exchanging whatever local coinage they had for a specific temple coin that they were using. And these temple coins were chosen from Tyre. Why Tyre? They didn't want to have Caesar's face on their coins. And of course, this was part of the Roman Empire, and Caesar Augustus and Tiberius, these were the Caesars of that time. Of course, Herod had minted his own coins as well, and there were other coins during this era. So what they did is they chose a coin minted in Phoenicia, and that coin, which is a beautiful silver coin, has not the face of Caesar, but the face of Melkert, the Phoenician Baal. And it just shows you the animosity and the the feelings that the Jewish population had at the Roman oppression during that time and the Roman dominance at that time. They would prefer Baal on their coins that they would use in the temple over Caesar. So we have a few of those here in the museum. And these were, of course, the same coins that Judas would have received, the 30 pieces of silver that he received when he betrayed Christ. So again, you pick up one of these coins and you think, who had this in their pocket last? And,
Right.
Or who held this last? I mean, it's one of those amazing moments, especially when you find it in the archaeological record.
Yeah. So where do you think this will all lead? We've got all this evidence that's continuing to unfold through time. Is there a lot more archaeological work to be done? Is there still a lot of sites out there that have not really been gone through yet?
That's a really good question. Yes, absolutely. We're just barely scratching the surface.
Really?
Archaeology is a new discipline, but
Wow.
if you look at the amount of material that there is just in the country of Israel alone, not including Jordan and Egypt, and we're just barely scratching the surface. Just give you a couple of examples. And these are the limitations that archaeologists face when they're dealing with things. And that's what gives us caution when we hear major claims made. Well, we haven't found this, therefore this couldn't have happened, or we're just barely starting. There are hundreds of sites that are not even known in the Middle East that haven't even been found. Hundreds, maybe even thousands of them. Every time a road goes in or construction happens in Israel, something is unearthed. A synagogue is found, or something amazing as it comes up out of the ground. Often that happens. We have sites that are in restricted areas, like the West Bank, that are very difficult to excavate today. Hundreds of sites that haven't been excavated. And even the sites that we do know, how many of those sites have been excavated to any real extent? So we've worked, for instance, at Lachish with 100 to 120 staff and volunteers for 5 years.
Wow.
We're the fourth expedition, but less than maybe 1% of that site has been excavated.
Less than 1%?
Less than 1%. The Harvard excavations at Ashkelon, 31 years of excavation, less than 2% of that site has been excavated.
Really?
So we're basing our conclusions often on just a fraction, on pieces of a puzzle that we're trying to pull together. And it's good evidence. So when we find a name of an individual, I mean, it's like finding a needle in a haystack. I mean, literally a huge haystack in a country the size of the state of New Jersey. And you're trying to figure out how this related to biblical history and so forth. So I tell my students it's a very new discipline. We're just starting, and that's why it's so important to continue working in the Middle East, excavating in the Middle East, because while we have a lot of excavations that have gone on, there's always new things to be looking for and new questions that need to be answered.
So this is startling. This is really in its infancy. I mean, you're saying that there's like a long road of excavating to be done and archaeological finds to be had. I mean, it kind of boggles the imagination, or even creates anticipation as to, geez, what might we find, right?
It does, and that's what brings us back in the field every year.
Yeah.
And it's expensive. So, the amount of investment that goes into a project, it's quite incredible to think how much has been uncovered over the years, and how much more there still would be or could be to find. Take Jerusalem, for example.
Right.
I mean, this is the heart of ancient Israel, biblical Israel, whether it's the Old Testament era or the New Testament era. We have a city that's occupied today. We have a city with houses and buildings and hotels and an infrastructure that's built over everything. Where do you dig in Jerusalem? Where can you dig in Jerusalem?
Right.
So the city of David has a major excavation. There are other projects that have gone on, but much of the city is virtually unknown because of the fact of these complications, modern complications to what is there. So I have a friend, a colleague, who's excavated and opened up a parking lot, and has been able to work under that parking lot for the last several years, and he's finding amazing things.
Wow.
How many parking lots are there in Jerusalem, and what are there under those parking lots, or under those houses, or under those hotels? So you really have, you have to be careful when you hear things like, well, we don't have evidence for this, or we don't have evidence for that. I like to look at the evidence we do have and realize we're just barely beginning.
Yeah, so if we look now at kind of the evidence that exists and the cooperation, if I'm understanding you correctly, what you're saying is there's not evidence for everything, but there's a good body of evidence that exists that corroborates the history as it's written in the Bible. But also, we've barely scratched the surface of developing additional evidence, or if you look at, here's the total sum of evidence that exists,
Right.
we're like just barely scratching the top, and what we have found so far is I guess, very validating in many respects.
It is. And right, so you have this argument going back to the time of David again. You have this argument that David only was in a very small city of Jerusalem, maybe a tent village. You have this argument that it was only over a small populated hinterland. Why? Because not many cities from the time of David have been found.
Right.
So suddenly you're making an argument out of the lack of evidence.
Right.
When the fact of the matter is that we're just uncovering that evidence more and more as time goes on. Right. So the city that we excavated at Kirbet Kayafa from 2007 to 2013 was a city that dated back to the time of Saul and David. And just with that one excavation over a period of just a few years, that whole argument has been challenged because we now have a city that dates back to that time, a fortified garrison city on the border that has writing, that has storage facilities, that has a major monumental building in the center that could have been a kind of administrative building, that has all of the architectural features that are used later on in Judean construction and architecture. So we have the beginning of a Judean type of building, architecturally design that is continuing to move on through the centuries. And that didn't exist prior to 2007, just 10 years ago. Yeah. So we have to be very careful what we say and how we frame those things, given the limitations that we have.
That's it for this particular interview. Thanks for joining me. Really excited to take this ongoing journey with you as we keep bringing more content. If you haven't already, you really should subscribe to this channel. There's a lot of phenomenal content coming down the road into the future that you'll want to know about. Leave a comment down here. I think people would love to hear from you, and then you can hear from them too. If you liked it, go ahead and give a like. It only takes half a second, and share this with people that you care about. The world needs more light in it right now. So thanks for being with me. Hope to connect with you again soon.